Greetings, horror, sci-fi, and Exorcist fans. Drew here from Horror, Sci-Fi, and Beyond, and I hope you're all having a happy third week of October. And today, we're going to be reviewing an iconic classic, a juggernaut, not just in horror, but in all of cinema. It is the greatest, in my opinion, and scariest horror movie of all time. No movie has scared moviegoers more than this movie. And this movie turns 50 years old this year and is still scary audiences nowadays. And that movie is 1973's William Friedkin's The Exorcist. See what I did there? That was nice. And there's only one man that I can review this movie with. And that man, from the Fear of God podcast, Mr. Lackey, but not least, Mr. Reed Lackey. How's it going, man?
Thank you so much for that introduction, man. It's going very well. I'm very excited. I always, all you had to do was say, "Hey, would you like to review The Exorcist?" And I'm there. I'm already in. Love it.
And what's crazy is we actually lost this director recently.
Yeah, I know. It was just earlier this month, actually, as we're recording this. It was just, and as listeners will hear it, it's been a couple of months actually. But William Friedkin was 87 years old.
Wow.
Prolific and influential filmmaker. Sometimes a controversial personality, but he will very, very much be missed. A very passionate filmmaker, very passionate about his craft. It was great. Yeah,
we'll definitely get into a lot of that in this hour and a half that we have together. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to this.
Sure.
Like I said, there's literally nobody I would want to review this movie with, because I know you have a burning passion for this movie, and I feel like you dominate this conversation for sure.
I will do my best not to. I promise you that. I'm honored to be here.
It's all good. But we'll definitely talk about William Friedkin at some point, and he was definitely I would say, like Don Rickles with the Rat Pack, how he was like an honorary member of the Rat Pack. I feel like William Friedkin's like sort of an honorary member of like the new Hollywood directors. That being Spielberg, Lucas, Scorsese, De Palma. Like, I feel like he's kind of in there. Like, he didn't get talked about too much, but he was definitely he definitely did a lot of, was in the same kind of vibe. Like, he did so much differently.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you about, especially his strongest work is still being talked about in ways that continue to be influential. I think that's one somewhat different thing about him, is that he was very, very influential in a lot of ways, but not often credited as such. Some of his most important films, not only The Exorcist, but also The French Connection, To Live and Die in L.A., Sorcerer, they were very influential films, loved by cinema lovers for years, but not often talked about in popular culture.
Yeah, and I didn't know this, but apparently Gene Hackman, who played Popeye Doyle in The French Connection, he's actually, from what I understand from Friedkin, is pretty left-leaning, and he felt very uncomfortable playing that character, especially saying the N-word. But that's part of the character. Like, he would, that would be a word that he would say.
Yeah, no, that's the same exact thing that I've heard. Friedkin has said that at least once, that I heard directly in an interview. He said that Hackman was, because of Hackman's personal values, he had a very difficult time playing the character of Popeye Doyle, and Friedkin had to work very hard to pull out from him the performance that he needed. Hackman wound up going on to win Best Actor for that performance. So clearly some effective work.
Yeah, I did not know that Gene Hackman identified as a liberal, because you see him as Detective Doyle or Lex Luthor, and those are very much very right-wing kind of characters.
Yeah.
With Doyle, being kind of like this super racist police detective, and then Lex Luthor being like a billionaire, egomaniacal person.
I would throw in there his sheriff role from Unforgiven. I forget the character's name, but he was the sheriff in Unforgiven, playing a very similar type of character. Yeah, very very fascinating how different his individual persona was. I've also heard, though I haven't heard this often enough to completely throw my weight behind it, but I've also heard that Hackman as a personality was also kind of quiet and definitely not the volcanic sort of presence that he so frequently delivered on screen,
Right.
but that he was more of a private and kind of reserved, more introverted person, softer spoken, among his friends,
Oh yeah.
and he always fascinated me because he retired so early. He's still around,
Mm.
he's for the last like 10 to 15 years, he's just been living his life, painting, riding bikes, and just enjoying retirement, which
Yeah,
is wild
like
to
the
me.
last movie I think he did was Welcome to Mooseport with
That's
William.
right.
Yeah, I remember we
Yep.
watched that in civics class. We were learning about like political like
Mm.
structures.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And also, fun fact: this is another kind of horror movie that Hackman was in. He was the blind man in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
did
gonna make
not recognize him.
espresso.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that fact that you spat it out during your review for that movie when he
Mhm.
said that he actually improv that line,
Yes. Oh
and
yeah.
then like everybody on the set like just bursted out of laughter. That's why I had to like fade it out.
Awesome. So awesome. I love it. Love
Yeah,
it
I
so
love that
much.
movie. That's probably between that and like Ferris Bueller. Those are like my two favorite comedies.
Oh, those are great ones. Those are great choices for favorite comedies.
Yeah, but enough about William Friedkin and Gene Hackman because we went way off the rails on that one. Um, let's get to the plot summary according to IMDb. When a teenage girl is possessed by a mysterious entity, her mother seeks the help of two priests to save her daughter. Now, before we get too deep into the movie,
Mhm.
how did you discover this movie, or how did you find out about it, and what is sort of like your relationship with the movie?
Yeah. So the first time I saw the film, I was 15. And 15 is kind of pushing the limits of maturity levels to
Mhm.
watch and fully grasp this film for what it is. But I had heard I loved the horror genre a lot at that point. I had watched many scary movies. It was pretty settled that horror was my favorite genre. And so I kept hearing about how, well, Exorcist is the scariest movie ever made.
Right.
So finally, I was able to watch it one evening when my parents were out of town. They often had to go for their jobs. They had to go to conferences and sometimes would be gone for the weekend. And sometimes I would accompany them. And a lot of times as I became a teenager, I would just stay home for that period of time, those couple of days. And so usually what I got to do is order some pizza and rent a couple of movies, and I was fine to just kind of hang by myself for a little while. Well, The Exorcist again was one of the films that I had seen on this night, and when I first saw it, what was kind of crazy was I was like, "Ooh, it was a test of stamina for me. Like, ooh, can I survive this movie?" But what stood out to me from the very first viewing is, yes, it was very visceral, very alarming. There were some scenes in it that I still didn't quite know exactly how to stomach. But then what happened is I was very drawn and very taken with so many of the more human elements of it, the more sensitive elements, I would say. I was very surprised to find the film to be as thoughtful as it was. I was very surprised to find the film dealing so directly with the problem of evil as it did. And so that really stood out to me from the very first time that I saw this film. And I loved it, but then over time I began to steadily think like, man, it's one of my favorite scary movies. And then progressively, not too long after that, I was like, yeah, that's definitely my favorite scary movie. But then as I began to sort of weigh it against other films I'd seen really in any genre, I finally, kind of in my early 20s began to be like, you know what? I think Exorcist is like my favorite movie. For a very long time, I had cited something different as my favorite movie and was citing like The Exorcist is like my second favorite movie because people would still be really scandalized to hear me boldly say that Exorcist was my favorite movie ever. But for many years now, for probably nearly 20 years now, I have proudly proclaimed, probably more often than people would prefer to hear that The Exorcist is my favorite film. So that's my relationship with it.
Yeah, well, cool, man. How I found out about this movie was, as you know, when we did our top 13 favorite horror moments list.
Mhm.
I talked about like, I watched some of the Universal monsters when I was at a younger age.
Yeah.
Didn't really grow up with those movies, but kind of discovered them when I got older. And then, but I was always interested in horror, and every time October rolled around, and we
Mhm.
went to like Halloween stuff, and we saw like the Freddy Krueger glove or like the Michael
Mm.
Myers or Jason Voorhees mask. I would always ask my mom about these characters because she, grew up with these characters or watched these movies when she was younger too, because he's a pretty big horror fan, as well.
Yeah.
And I eventually asked her around this time, what was the scariest movie that you ever seen?
Mm.
And she's like, without a stutter, without like a second thought, The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
she kind of told me the whole deal. And I even told her, in the middle of rewatching this movie for the fourth or fifth time, that
Hmm.
I'm watching the scariest movie of all time, The Exorcist. And he's like, Drew, just don't say that to me like that. Just you saying that brings up like all the images in that movie. Like that's
Mm.
yeah, that's power, man. That is
Yeah.
power right there. And there's people I know like today that weren't even around when this movie came out.
Oh yeah.
That this movie petrifies them, and that's power right there.
Absolutely. It is
Yeah,
still, and you said it in the introduction to it. I think it's so true to be 50 years old and still be able to invoke the same kind of experiences in people. I mean, because we've seen a lot. Films have progressed a tremendous amount. And I think people seeing The Exorcist for the very first time, even if they have seen other things of its kind, it still has a power to be able to really unsettle people. And I think a big part of why is because of how straightforward it approaches the material. It doesn't approach it in a flashy way. It approaches it in a very almost kind of documentary sensibility about it, unadorned by
yeah,
manipulative flourishes. And I think that still resonates with people.
yeah. And I think it's interesting, and it's sort of the first kind of found footage movie in a way, because especially like the hospital or the doctor scenes is
Hmm.
very like felt like a documentary, and I find
Hmm.
it interesting. I watched a documentary on Sutter, the found footage one, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, the somebody pointed out that like the first kind of example of like making horror media realistic or make it feel like it's something that really happened was Dracula. Could have told in journal entries.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I feel like the more realistic something feels like Jaws, like there's even moments in Jaws that feel kind of like almost a documentary, or it feels like a different movie. Like especially the part when
Yeah.
like Richard Dreyfuss is doing the autopsy. That's like a completely different movie, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. That sense of realism is something that I feel too frequently gets lost in current modern films. There's not so much of a suspension of disbelief. I think a lot of times, and this is true of The Exorcist, is largely true of Jaws as well. And I think it's part of the problem of moving away from practical effects. Listen, computers can do amazing things. CGI have done incredible things and have created visions on screen that would not literally not have been possible
Right.
without computer technology. But in the same way, I feel that these practical effects are really what creates, the people who are experiencing what we see on screen in The Exorcist. The actors were experiencing a version of that. That bed,
Oh yeah.
because of a contraption, was really shaking in front of them. The things were really moving around the room
Yeah,
because they didn't
Jurassic
have.
Park is another good example because a lot of those shots with the T Rex was an actual animatronic, and so like
Yes,
you can bring more of a realism into that. And I believe
absolutely.
I heard Ron Zombie talk about this on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Mm,
He said when he worked with the Spy Kid actor Daryl's something.
Okay.
When he just because he worked with them on Halloween, the
Right. Right.
that Rob did or Rob Zombie did.
Mm-hmm.
He said that when he did Spy Kids, it was so weird. He didn't know it was so CGI heavy. Like it was weird for him to
Oh,
interact with.
yeah. Yeah. It's a completely different art form. It completely, because you have to imagine in real time what you're interacting with versus being able to react to something physically in front of you. And it's a skill that I respect. I
Mm,
don't know that I would have the capacity to do it as fluidly as I see so many talented actors be able to pull something off today. Um, but I do think that is at least part of why our minds and imaginations that these things don't stick with us as much as they did. I think films which are more rooted and grounded in practical, realistic effects,
mm,
I think have a tendency to have more staying power.
right,
And that's not me disparaging how CGI technology has developed over time.
right.
But I think the ones we still talk about, the
Mm,
ones that continue to show up as the greatest horror films ever made, are all films from eras where computer technology was not where it is today. You talk about your Texas Chainsaw Massacre, your Exorcist,
right.
Halloween, even Poltergeist. Like so
Mm.
many of the iconic films that people still talk about as the greatest horror films ever made. They all come from that era, and I think there's a connection there. I really do.
Yeah. And I think there's some good contenders like from like the last few decades, like Hereditary comes to mind and the
Mm,
Babadook.
yeah.
Um
Yep.
Get Out. I think Get Out, like not as far
Yeah.
as like scariest movie, but as far as like impact. As far as a
Oh,
movie
absolutely.
completely destroyed the world in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Like I don't think any I think just for the last decade, like the 2000
Sure.
I
Sure.
don't think any horror movie has done that quite like Jordan Peele's to Get Out.
Oh, I agree with that. I think that film is still going to be discussed 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now.
Yeah, well,
It's still going to be seen as a landmark.
there was an Amazon show, like a comedy show, where they one of the episodes they did like a musical version of Get Out.
Oh, I don't think I saw that. That's funny.
Yeah, and that's like how like all these comedy shows in the '70s, like SNL, did parodies of like the Exorcist or like The Godfather.
Oh,
Like in the same decade those movies came out in, because it just had that kind of impact. But I know we're kind of dilly down a little bit, but
it's all right.
I want to get to the actual review of the movie.
Hmm.
Um, so just to let you know, we're doing the director's cut of this film
Awesome.
because
Awesome.
it's the version that I have on digital. Um,
Hmm.
Plus, there's some scenes in there that are just iconic to this movie that
Absolutely.
wasn't in the original.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I prefer the director's cut, and I have profound respect for the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut is the version upon which the legacy of this film is built.
mm,
So I don't take anything away from the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut is a powerful film, and I think the things that I love about the film are still present in the theatrical cut.
mm,
That having been said, when I choose to rewatch the film just for my own engagement with it, my interest, I'm wanting to revisit the story, I consistently choose the director's cut. The
yeah,
director's cut has those additional moments in it that mean so much to me and that enhance the story. I definitely think it is the preferred version to experience the film for those who had never seen it. See the director's cut.
I love the opening of this movie where it opened on a suburban street. Like so, it basically like a shot of a house. And I guess like
Mm-hmm.
either the light got turned off or on, would kind of
Mm,
create a spooky atmosphere, and then it kind of goes down into like the street.
yeah,
And you get the shot of the Virgin Mary, and then it just these two shots that tells you like something kind of fucked up is about to happen here in about
it's
in the course of
immediately
like 2
unsettling.
hours.
Yeah, yeah. It immediately arrests the attention and such a hard pivot for it to go from those opening scenes, really with no dialogue,
Mm,
and then shunt us as the viewers all the way over to Iraq.
right.
And you're like, what's going on here? What is this? How
Yeah,
are these things connected?
I find it interesting that two. iconic movies from two directors from the new Hollywood movement start their movies out in the desert. This movie
Mm.
being this, and then the other movie being Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never drew that connection, but that is interesting. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. Um, I think it's, and you want to talk about like setting the mood, like Father Marin looking at the statue of Azuzu is real creepy.
It's
And I
incredible.
always forget like the bottom part of the statue is really enlarged. And I'll let you fill in the blank on that one.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and that shot is really affecting in the sense of like it tells you visually
Mhm.
what you're about to see, which is not only a battle between good and evil, but a battle between mankind, like human beings, and the supernatural, the preternatural, the inexplicable. That one shot of Marin staring down the statue just conveys so much about what we're about to encounter, just with a single visual shot. It's incredibly iconic. I
Yeah,
love it.
and going back to that thing I just said earlier, like the reason why I think the lower part of the statue is like that is because the demon is very perverted. And there's a lot of sexual stuff kind of going on.
Oh yeah,
So
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's very subliminal for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I think um I think Father Marin, the rivalry between Father Marin and Brazuzu is in that long line of good versus evil. So
Mm.
Dracula versus Van Helsing.
Yeah.
One character represents evil, and one character represents good. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Batman and Joker,
Mm-hmm.
Luke Skywalker and the Emperor or Darth Vader, even though he turns.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know,
Sure,
Harry
sure.
Potter or Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are classic good and evil.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Another testament to the power of this movie. It's the fact that like Max Van Sydow was like in his mid 30s or 40s when he filmed
Mm-hmm.
this movie, and this movie's like 50 years old, and the makeup still looks amazing.
It
Like
does.
you can tell that this guy is supposed to be young. Like you literally cannot tell that this is makeup at all.
I know, I know. And I think a huge credit of that is to his performance because he also does an incredibly effective job carrying himself
Mhm.
as an older man. What I notice a lot with age up makeup is a lot of times the actors themselves will give some attention maybe to their voice, or they'll give a little bit of attention to like slow down their movements, but they don't give the same kind of care and attention to the entire way their body would age over time. And Sidow in this role absolutely does, whether it's a product of his classical training, whether it's a product of his experience as a performer, every part of him, he carries himself
Mhm.
like like an aged man, like a weary man. And I think that sells it, even though he himself at the time was so much younger. His performance helps that, that suspension of disbelief that you see. The makeup, to your point, the makeup looks incredible, but then at the same time, he does so much of the work himself by simply carrying
Right.
himself as an older person.
Let me ask you this. Since William Friedkin was one of those directors like a Kubrick, like a James Cameron,
Mm-hmm.
who really pay attention to details
Yeah.
and like the little things in the background and whatnot, and it's like subtext. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that was a William Friedkin idea or a Max von Sydow idea to to like to come up with a way of how Marin carries himself?
That's a really, really good point. I think, now obviously don't know this definitively, but I would imagine it is a Max von Sydow idea.
Okay.
What I have come to understand about William Friedkin, controversial as he was, is he expected his actors to do the work. He was not the kind of director to micromanage their performance in the way that, like he expected them to study their character.
Mhm.
If they weren't doing what he wanted them to do, he would go to some unconventional ways to get the performance out of them that he wanted. But in terms of characterizations like that, he largely seems to have left that expectation on the burden of the actors. So I would venture to say that was probably a Max von Sydow choice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do want to mention something real quick. I know
Sure.
you mentioned earlier that this movie, The Exorcist, um, you said you're a little bit young, a little bit too young to be watching this, and I would imagine it opened you up to a lot of things like that you weren't aware of.
Well, one thing that shouldn't be ignored about my personal history is I grew up in a religious household that was charismatic and Pentecostal by persuasion. Now, for listeners who may not know what that means, is that means that that particular strain of evangelical Christianity was already very that they talked a lot about what we would call spiritual warfare.
Mm,
So I think one thing that positioned me even at 15 sort of ready to engage this film a bit differently is that I had grown up in a household and surrounded by my parents' peers and the church culture that they lived in that was already talking a lot about the effect of evil, even conversations about possession, conversations about our battle against the forces of evil and how that plays out in the real world. So by the time I saw this movie at 15, I already had vocabulary and already had concepts that I had grown up with that made, I think, this film a little bit more accessible for me to receive in a different way
right.
versus someone who didn't grow up in a household like that and
Mm,
they're encountering these concepts at the same time. I'm very curious how that would play out if a person who just absolutely came in with no sort of conversational aspect of that, how they would receive that. But I do think it had an impact on me being able to engage this film differently right from my very first viewing.
yeah, I definitely grew up in a very similar environment too. But
Mm-hmm.
I just meant more on the aspect of like there's a lot of language that the demon uses.
Oh yeah, just the vulgarity
Yeah,
and the rawness of it. No, I can I can appreciate that. At the time though, um honestly, I have for as long as I can remember, I had a pretty strong palate for mature content in
okay,
films. Yeah, I can't ever remember a film that I saw that was unsettling or upsetting to
mm,
me in things like how much foul language they used or
right,
in I didn't watch very many things that pushed the boundaries of sexual content very
mm,
much, but in terms of violence and in foul language, I can't remember a time growing up when I saw a film and I was like, oh my
right,
god, I'm not used to them using language like this. I think just along the way there was some understanding in my mind that like this is a film,
mm,
and even though this is not something I'm exposed to in my day-to-day world, this is the way these people navigate. And I think that has just always been a mindset that I certainly didn't always have it, but I can't
right.
remember how early I adopted it. For as long as I can remember, I've
Yeah,
had that sort of mindset.
I love the fact that there are some parts of this movie that doesn't even seem like a horror movie.
Mm,
Like it seemed like a drama about this Catholic priest crisis of faith
yeah,
after his
absolutely.
mom dies, and then that sort of gets interconnected with Chris McNeil and her daughter because they're I don't know if they straight up say if Miss McNeil is an atheist, but she's definitely not in touch with her spiritual side.
They so it is explicitly stated in the book.
Okay.
I don't know that the film ever goes so far as to say she is an atheist, but yes, she when we first see her in the film, she does not believe in God,
Mm,
doesn't believe in really, complex spirituality at all. And so what's happening to her daughter is very alarming and jarring to her.
mm,
And there's actually some care and attention through the course of the film to bring her to the place to where she would be willing to go and to consult with the church because she wasn't spiritual. In fact, when it's first suggested, she's like, "You want me to take her to a witch doctor?" She doesn't match the two things up in her mind. It doesn't make any sense to her why they would be driving her into the arms of somebody that's religious. And in fact, it is the scene incredibly controversial, but it's the scene of the crucifix where Reagan is mutilating herself with a crucifix in a very vulgar way.
Right.
That's the moment that it is so profane, and it is so profane in a religious way that at that point, Chris McNeil as a character can no longer ignore that there is something inherently religious happening to her daughter, even though she doesn't understand it. And that's what pushes her to try to go where she would otherwise not go.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why this movie is so scary. Is because the casting of Linda Blair. Because because before she starts getting possessed, and this is a slow process. This is very much like I said, when me and Jackson talked about ginger snaps last week, a very slow process. Like every time you see this little girl, like something new is happening to her. And I think, and she's just so adorable before she turns, and that's
lovely girl. Yeah. Well, and because on set, Linda Blair had to say those lines. They used a different voice in post for the demon, but when they're filming the scene, it's Linda Blair there actually saying the lines. And in fact, at one point, it was the actor who plays Father Karras had come, and he was doing an interview and said that during one of the scenes, Max von Sydow, proper actor that he was, he walked onto the scene and he immediately stepped in. And when he stepped in to perform his role, they yelled action. And then Linda Blair, in that sweet 12-year-old little voice, says these vile, profanity-riddled lines. And as soon as she let loose with one of those, I think it was the "your mother" line, when she busted out with that line, when she busted out with it, the Jason Miller, the actor who played Father Karras, said Max von Sydow paused for a second, adjusted his glasses, and went, cut. Like they just couldn't stomach hearing this beautiful little girl say such horrible, awful things. And I think that's also part of it. Linda Blair expressed such a maturity, even at such a young age, because they asked her, they're like, "Are you okay? How do you stomach saying these things?" And Linda Blair, at like 12 years old, looked over and said, "Oh, that's not me saying it. That's the character Reagan is saying it. I don't talk like that. That's the character Reagan for what she's going through at that moment," which is already, that already exhibits a maturity of understanding of the acting process for a 12-year-old to be able to grasp that so fluently. That's really impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah. And I think one testament to how much of a good storyteller Friedkin was, and with his ability to articulate himself in interviews, how when he would talk about the vulgarity that this little girl that Linda Blair had to spout out of her mouth while filming this movie is the fact that he would say, "Well, Linda Blair was like, I can't say that," and it's the way he says it. Like I can picture Linda Blair saying that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The one thing I totally forgot that just completely just sends shivers down my spine was the Captain Howdy face flash, and it's like the most random spots in the movie.
Yeah.
And now I got to say straight up that the actual picture is pretty scary, but it's not like anything that's going to give me nightmares. But the fact that it would just flash in random spots.
Yes.
That was the scary part.
It's very subtle, because if you're watching the film, particularly in a theater, but even if you're watching the film at home, you're like, did I see what I just did I see it? Because it comes up so fast. Yeah,
and I even watched the H.A. Zen maze the Halloween Horror Nights maze.
Yeah.
So what I don't know if you saw videos of this, but how they did it was they would have like different. They would recreate the room over
Hmm.
like over and over again.
I went through it. Yeah,
Oh, so, okay.
yeah,
Okay,
I went through the Exorcist Horror Nights
well,
maze.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course you did, kid. You're Exorcist nerd. But yeah, this would be more for my audience. So what they did was they recreated the room like multiple times, and in between you walk into the room, they would have like the hallway, and they would have like the Captain Howdy face just flash up randomly, which is awesome.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was really great. Very
Dude, that
creepy,
would
very
scare the
unnerving.
shit out of me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, yeah, it's really, really unnerving.
One of my favorite moments in this movie is Karras's nightmare when he's in the middle of the
Oh,
street and he
yeah.
sees his mom, and then that freaking damn Captain Howdy face pops up again.
Again. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So much about that, though, is reflective of his personal trauma and his personal grief that he wasn't able to provide for his mother. He wasn't able to rescue his mother. And he's tormented, partially because he's having a crisis of faith, but also tormented in the fact that the life he chose, the life of a priest, which is not a lucrative life, is not a life of profound wealth and riches. And so that means that when his mother needed him and could have used something, could have used some money, could have used some resources, he's not able to provide for her. And that is a personal, he views it as a personal failing on his part. And there's so much of that that's wrapped up in that dream about his mother slipping away from him and him
Mm,
failing her and running after her, unable to reach her, unable to protect her. And, the demon through Reagan exploits that in the final exorcism sequence.
yeah,
It's
and
it's Karras's major
why
weakness.
that's why I hate that infamous line about his mom like that.
Oh,
Yeah, like I don't really want to like repeat it or even hint at.
no, of course. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like the most evil vowel thing I've
Yeah.
ever heard in my life. And if a demon ever said that about my mom, like I will grab that person by the collar, no matter who it is, and be like, "You demon, you get out! You stop talking about my mom. You get out of
It's
him."
it's very affecting. And the film very brilliantly expresses the psychological attack, that the spiritual is rooted to this as well, this psychology, this attack on the mind and how we think and how we feel about what we think. So the demon is just tormenting Karras with this concept of, not only could you not save her in life, remember, he's a priest. Karras is a priest. So to attack him, not only could he not provide for her in the physical world, but the demon is attacking the concept that she is now in a better place. And he is
Right.
directly going to the root of his crisis of faith, saying, not only is she not in a better place, she's in a worse place, and it's because of you. It's really dreadful, really
Yeah.
dreadful.
And I totally forgot that this is like that line. It's a quick line. Like it's not like it's in the middle of all this crazy stuff going on. Like it.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
and that was something that would happen. Like it wouldn't be like this big bold thing. If you
Yeah.
think,
Again, speaking to the film's almost like clinical sensibilities, how it just portrays it, you just hit the nail on the head. It doesn't flash with lots of very calculated, this line is spoken, then this line is spoken. It's a lot of chaos. The
right.
demon is oppressing them with language while they're reciting the Roman ritual. And it's a battle of words. It's a battle of wills. It's a spiritual war that's taking place in this very confined little room. It's a very, very affecting approach. And I think that's what a lot of films that have tackled possession since then have gotten wrong, is they stay very heightened, very theatrical, very performative. And it's as if everything is waiting patiently for this volleying sequence of language.
Right.
Whereas in The Exorcist, again, to your point, it's all happening at once. It's happening over top of itself. You almost need to watch the scene a couple of times to catch everything that everybody is saying. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I just think a lot of '70s movies in general are like that. Like
Mm,
you take like
I
a
think that's
crowd
right.
scene, like in Jaws, and like everybody's like, or like Close Encounters with like the family, like everybody's
Hmm.
talking over each other, and
Yeah.
Like you can barely hear things. That's how it would be like.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, you going back to the whole thing about being a priest, it's not a very lucrative business.
Hmm.
Um, do want to talk about the theme of money. Something I did not think about.
Yeah,
Um, and I don't know if you're a fan of this particular film critic, but Chris Stuckman,
Chris Stuckman. I know the name,
yeah,
but
he's pretty famous on YouTube.
yeah, and honestly, I don't think I've engaged much of his stuff. Most of the film critics that I read and listen to and study are either personal friends or very, very old, like Ebert and
Oh yeah,
Siskel and Pauline Kael and stuff like that. That's more who I'm more familiar with than
oh
the
yeah,
modern rising voices of it, which is probably a deficiency on my part. But no, I
yeah.
don't know much of his stuff.
Yeah, I'll send a link to his Exorcist review. But
Hmm.
he did this Exorcist review with one of his friends, Matt Brando, who has his own YouTube channel.
Hmm.
And basically, Stuckman basically said the one thing I don't like about this movie is it didn't really get into the faithlessness of Mick McNeil a whole lot. And then
Mm.
Matt Brando kind of counteracted that, and he says, "Well, here's what I think it is, because I feel like one of the things in the movie is money, and that
Hmm.
she's like this actress, though she has all this money, cannot figure out a way scientifically or through medicine to cure her daughter, and
Yeah, right.
that's why she turns to Father Karras."
That is really fascinating. I hadn't heard that take on it specifically. She definitely is a person of resources at which she's able to have these very extensive
Mm.
procedures and examinations to try to not only consulting medical doctors, but also psychologists and therapists to try to discern what's going on with the daughter, which obviously would take a tremendous amount of money. But that's really fascinating. I hadn't heard anybody bring that up specifically.
Yeah, and the first sort of because there's like a series. I can't remember because I haven't studied this movie as much as probably you have, but like there's a
I've
few.
studied it too much, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean the Real Hot movies like that.
Exactly.
Uh, but there's a few scenes in this movie towards the back half where like Karis is talking with McNeil or Miss McNeil, and they definitely they sort of have like um different philosophies in a way.
Mm,
Even
hmm.
though Karis is starting to have a crisis of faith, and I like how Karras writes off McNeil's need for an exorcist due to his lack of faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
And McNeil says, "Jesus Christ, won't somebody help me?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And you would think, see, and on one hand, you think she's saying Jesus Christ like anybody would.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Like, I think like at this point, like she's starting to get a spiritual breakthrough at this
I
point.
would agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And it's one born of desperation. And
Mm,
I feel that at that moment, and this is something that I've heard before, so I can't take credit for it, but I've heard before people talk about that often breakthroughs come right after a breakdown. And I
mm,
think in that moment, she's almost having a spiritual breakdown where she's feeling such a profound desperation. She's, oh my God, please somebody help my daughter. At this point, she's willing to try anything, almost literally anything, because what she's seen her daughter exhibit is beyond human comprehension. It's
mm,
beyond the realm of, she just didn't have a grid for it. She didn't have a fathom imagination for what her daughter is experiencing. And so, yeah, she's profoundly desperate. And I will say this, I don't think it's as much it is partially rooted in that. I don't think Karras's doubt about whether or not an exorcism would work is as rooted in his lack of faith or his struggle with faith as much as it is rooted in just how outlandish or how outrageous it is. In the text of the Bible, Jesus would step forward and directly call forth healing from certain people. But except in some kind of fringe examples of Christianity today, you won't see that happen a tremendous amount. It does exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it won't be common for the vast majority of preachers to step forward and declare healing for someone. Again, that happens a bit more in certain very specific areas of Christianity. So I think getting back to Karras, when he hears about this exorcism thing, and it's such a rare ritual in their faith at that time, he's like, wait a second, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know that we would do this. Not to mention the fact, it can't be ignored, that Karras as an individual is a psychologist. So he became a priest, but his study is specifically in psychology. And so he's naturally going to be prone to want to look for natural solutions first, because he's aware of mental illness. He's aware
Right.
of, you know,
Forgot about
yeah.
that.
And so that's what he's going to be prone to seek those natural explanations first before turning to this thing that is admittedly beyond his depth. He needs help from Father Marin in order to perform what he has to do for Reagan.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because, as you know, I'm not like religious, like I don't
Right.
identify as Christian, but I do think there's something out beyond science and beyond logic.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of have just a feeling deep inside, and there's definitely been some instances in my life and people that I know around me
Yeah.
and
Yeah, of course.
things. And so like that's something I'm constantly fighting with when I
Yeah.
see like kind of stuff is like, well, like my logical side, my scientific side of my brain sees it this way, but it's constantly battling with my spiritual side of my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I can completely relate to that. And honestly, that struggle, I think I say this with a full heart. I think that struggle is very healthy.
Mm,
I think there are times where we can get stubborn about not reconciling those two things. But I think the tension between seeking natural, what we know about our bodies and our minds and what we learned and what we've come to understand as a
mm,
culture and as a civilization, should always remain in some degree of tension
right.
with the inexplicable part of it. I think that tension is actually healthy, as long as it doesn't tilt into a place that gets fatalistic, as
Mm,
long as it doesn't tilt into a place that gets terribly extreme or imbalanced.
right.
I think that tension is very wise and healthy.
To be honest with you, I don't think I ever said this on here, but
Mm-hmm.
I almost kind of take like a deist kind of view on
Oh, okay.
where I
Okay.
think definitely he is powerful enough to create everything and
Hmm.
to come up with a system for like nature. Like so like you plant an acorn in the ground and then there's like a whole you had the whole process of like water and photosynthesis. But
Sure.
I don't
Sure.
think he's up there with his god powers like making the tree grow. Like he
Yeah.
allows thing to take his course. Like so I don't think he gives people diseases, but it just
Mm-hmm.
happens that way. It's just a law of nature. I don't think he causes.
Yeah.
Um.
I can understand that. I can definitely understand that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's where I kind of stand on God. I take more of a deist kind of.
Well, you're in good company. Some of the most brilliant minds in the history of philosophy and science have taken a similar approach, believed in, something as an initial cause, a prime mover, and then not necessarily taking the step to believe, closer to what I do about intervention. I'm a little bit closer to the belief of um, God occasionally intervening. But like you, I think there's a tremendous amount of natural processes that play their way out, that to your point, were just established from as we want to say it, the foundations of the earth, that just progress
Yeah.
naturally and progress normally. And I definitely feel the same way.
I have a hard time going full deist because I want to think that there's some divine intervention,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and I don't want to get too
Yeah.
deep into my personal life on here, but like
No,
I feel
certainly.
like some things are kind of like maybe he didn't physically cause
Mm-hmm.
it to happen, but he allows certain things to happen.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that amount. Well, and especially respecting, like, So I don't mean to throw a curveball, and actually, hopefully, this is in line with the spirit of what you say about not getting too personal, but also honoring the moment. Is I feel like thoughtfulness about this film elicits the kind of conversation we're happening. It makes people wonder and interrogate how they feel about the relationship between God and mankind. I think that's what this film does, is it draws that out of us to make us wonder and hopefully better define how we really feel about the presence of evil in the world, the presence of good in the world, and the forces beyond our understanding that directly contribute to what happens in the world we see around us. So I think you're right on point.
This movie does kind of questions, kind of makes you question a lot of things.
Oh, it really does. Well, and William Peter Blatty, the author of the novel and of the screenplay for this film, had said very specifically that he said, if you cross the threshold of coming to a recognition of a devil figure, it's not a difficult leap at that point. That he even wrote a much smaller book exploring this theme, a nonfiction book called "If There Are Demons, There Were Angels Too." Basically, part of his guiding philosophy as a storyteller was, if we can confront and reckon with the nasty, ugly awfulness, then that can be a path to recognizing the good and recognizing the benevolent and recognizing what's all around us as well, and putting it in shorter terms. If we can come to grips with a devil, then we can make our way to God.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you gotta it's like what Meatloaf said. You gotta learn to dance before you learn to walk or wherever that.
Hey, that's great.
Yeah,
I love Meatloaf.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Meatloaf.
No, for real.
Yeah. One of the better, one of the best singers in rock history, I would say.
Incredible vocalist, just stunning vocalist. I know his theatrics are too much for some people, but I love him, and his vocal power was just incredible. It was amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Two things I want to talk about before we get to favorite part and scariest part, because we're doing scariest part to the least favorite part, because there's not a lot of negative stuff about this movie.
I agree.
And then we'll wrap this episode up.
Okay.
Now this movie features a classic or like an old school character actor by the name of Lee J. Cobb.
Yeah.
He plays Detective Kinderman. I think he's a detective, right?
Yeah, he's a detective. That's right, Detective Kinderman.
And he was in the 12 Angry Men and On the Waterfront, which is probably his two biggest roles.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's completely unrecognizable in this movie because he's known for tough guys.
Mm-hmm. He's a lot more soft-spoken in this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how he's like a fan of Chris McNeil.
It's so great. It's a wonderful thing. I love too his sense of humor in everything that he does. I love his character in this. Interesting to note. So Lee J. Cobb, you cited he played in 12 Angry Men. He played juror number 3 in 12 Angry Men. And then he played, I think he's a detective. I can't remember if he's a detective or a lieutenant in this moment. I think he might be a lieutenant, but Kinderman is his name. And so he plays Kinderman in this film. Interestingly enough, George C. Scott, the actor George C. Scott, played juror number 3 in 12 Angry Men, which the remake of 12 Angry Men was directed by William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, and George C. Scott would later play Lieutenant Kinderman in The Exorcist 3, which was directed by William Peter Blatty. Those connections there are some of my favorite things to point out to people. Yeah, Lee J. Cobb and George C. Scott.
Yeah, 7 degrees of Lee J. Cobb.
Exactly. But yeah, I love Cobb in this movie. He's one of my favorite characters, and I love in the director's cut. This doesn't happen in the original theatrical cut, but I love the moment at the very end in the director's cut when he reconnects with Father Dyer, and it's kind of just this breath that the movie has to show you, hey, all is well. The evil has been vanquished for the moment, and all is well, and all will be well. It's something I love, and Cobb pulls it off so effortlessly. It's
Yeah, I
great.
think they're gonna go see Wuthering Heights because Kinderman's a big movie buff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you caught the joke, right? Where he's like, where he cites these completely ridiculous actors in the movie that he's going to go see. It's clearly a fake movie that he's going to go see. He's like, Lucille Ball, and he's
Oh,
gonna.
I didn't even catch that was a joke. I thought like Lucy.
Yes, yeah, it's completely a joke because it's this high-minded, like, Shakespearean performance, and he's like, oh yeah, Lucille Ball's in it. It's
I got
complete. And so that's why when he's throwing out this joke, he's like, he's just brushing it off. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go see this high-minded movie, and it's got these ridiculous actors in it. So then when Father Dyer says back to him, I've seen it, that's he's like one-upping his joke because he made this ridiculous film, and then the father's like, oh yeah, I've seen that one. And that's why Kinderman smiles so big, and he's like, oh man, I've got another one here, because Father Karras had done the same exact thing to him. He made this really ridiculous fake movie, and Father Karras had said, oh, I've seen that one. It would be like me telling you this, oh yeah, they're doing it would be like me saying something, oh yeah, they're doing Romeo and Juliet, but it's with Jonah Hill and Amy Schumer that
right.
they're doing. And so then if I were to say to you, like, oh yeah, they're doing Romeo and Juliet with Jonah Hill and Amy Schumer, and you would go, oh yeah, I saw that. That's the joke. That's the interplay, the personal sort of rapport that they've developed with each other, which I think is beautiful. But I think you've highlighted on something that is one element of this 50-year-old film that I think is a bit lost on modern audience members, because they don't recognize the names or the associations as much to that end.
Yeah. Actually, there's one more thing I want to talk about, but we'll
Sure.
get here in a second. One thing we have to talk about is the iconic theme, which wasn't even originally written for this movie. It was from this progressive rock musician named, what was his name?
Mike Oldfield.
Yeah.
Mike Oldfield.
I'm
The
talking about
piece
the
is called.
song.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's called Tubular Bells. And
Tubular Bells. That's right. Oh man, it's yeah.
For this movie, it was
No,
that he made.
Friedkin had heard the piece before, and I don't know if you've heard this story or not. The story is pretty widely popularized. Lalo Schifrin, or Lalo, I think. Lalo Schifrin, fantastic composer, brilliant composer. Friedkin hired him, and Lalo Schifrin wrote the whole score and went in to perform the score for Friedkin. And listen, I never met Friedkin. I love the guy. I love the guy's films, but he could be hard. He could be rough. Presumably, Lalo Schifrin, in front of his wife and his agent and a 120-piece orchestra, Friedkin interrupted the performance, fired him on the spot, took the tape that they were recording and like threw it across the street, and which like very insulting. I mean, just really insulting this a wonderful composer. And then after that went to the music supervisor and told him about Tubular Bells. He's like, have you heard that piece? Go get me that piece. That's what I want in this film. Fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's just so iconic to this movie.
Yeah, and it's indelible now.
Yeah. Well, it's like Red Right Hand by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Like,
yeah.
Written like a few years before Scream came out, but like when you hear the boom, boom, boom,
so great.
You think of Ghostface. You think Ghostface is like right behind you about to stab you.
Oh yeah, it's so great, great.
And so the last thing I want to talk about before we get to the favorite part, scariest part, our favorite part, scariest part.
Yep.
Have you been to Georgetown, and have you walked up the Exorcist steps?
Still a dream of mine. Someday I will. I have never done it. It is a dream someday of mine. I think the only reason it has never happened is because that's a large vacation investment simply to do that thing. There's nothing else at the moment drawing me to that area of the country. But yeah, it's a dream of mine someday, if I'm ever near that area, to travel there specifically and be able to walk those steps. But no,
Yeah.
I've never had the pleasure yet.
Yeah, that's like the top 3 most famous steps in movies. Like the
Oh
Rocky
yeah.
steps, obviously. The Exorcist steps, and then the Joker steps.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's completely iconic. Huge tourist destination at this point. But yeah, I've never had the privilege yet.
Yeah,
Would
I
love
would
to
love,
someday.
yeah, I would love to go up the steps.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, all 3 of those steps, really. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they're roughly on the same kind of geographical location.
You could get to them. Yeah, if you went there, you could probably knock all 3 out in like a couple of days.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I mean, maybe me and my dad would take a trip there someday.
Okay.
To go
You're
to
much
Jersey.
closer to it than I am.
Oh yeah,
For you, it's a long day's drive. For me, it's a flight and renting a
yeah.
car and all the other stuff.
So let's get the favorite part and least favorite part. And so,
Cool.
what's your favorite part of this movie?
Well, my favorite part is specific to the director's cut, which is the version we're covering for this review. My favorite part of the film is the quiet interlude of the exorcism scene where Father Karras and Father Marin, after battling with the demon for a number of minutes, for quite a while, sit quietly on the steps and ponder why this is happening to this little girl. That is my favorite part of the film. I think it's the heart of the film. I think that is where part of why it was cut from the theatrical cut is William Friedkin at the time felt like it was explaining too much to the audience, that it was too close to telling the audience how to feel about it. And William Peter Blatty, it broke his heart literally to have it gone, which is part of why Friedkin honored that wish in the director's cut to include it again, because it is from the novel. It's a much longer scene in the novel, but they're just talking about why it's happening to this little girl. And then at one point, Father Marin, the older priest, says, I think the point is to make us despair, to make us see ourselves as animal and ugly, and to make us reject the possibility that God could love us. It's a very tender, quiet scene. In the director's cut, it creates a breath in this very assaultive kind of exorcism onslaught. It creates a breath right there in the middle of it, and it's my favorite part of the film.
Yeah, I definitely need to read the book. That's like been on my reading doc for a while.
Book's great. What you will discover with the book is that it very closely hews to the film. There are almost no differences. Everything that's in the film is in the book, but what the book does is expands out. Scenes like that, which are no more than maybe 2 minutes in the film, are 4 pages in the book. So it goes deeper into the themes. It goes deeper into the characterizations. And I think you would really benefit a lot from appreciating those things that don't translate very well to the screen itself. It's an excellent book. It's one of my favorite books too. But you will find that it is a very close translation to what happens in the film.
Yeah, cool, man. My favorite part would have to be just all the build up to Reagan being possessed, like all the little kind of like tiny scares, like
Sure.
eating on the floor, and
Oh man, that part's awful.
yeah, and her kind of freaking out in the hospital and like stuff like that. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
It's
like I said,
terrifying.
I'm not, like I'm skeptical about like a lot of demon possessions, and I actually do want to ask you that at like the end cap of
Yeah.
this. But I definitely not gonna play with a Ouija board. Like I was
No.
in Spirit Halloween. Like I said, I am skeptical, but I just don't want to take my chances. And I was in the Spirit Halloween store the other day, as we're recording this, and they had like a whole Ouija session when like they had like the Ouija board for like printing
Yeah.
on tons of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm saying clear away from that because I just don't want to be around it.
Nope.
That
Nope.
I
I won't
think
either.
um,
Yeah, I won't either. Even if we were to get into the brass tacks, which we don't have to go here, but even if we were to get into the brass tacks of what I believe spiritually and theologically, I still think like messing with that can do some, can kind of it can plant some seeds that can just kind of mess you up a little psychologically. So I choose not to even bother with that. It's not even that I'm terribly afraid anything terrible will happen. I just not one of those things I'm really into.
it could kind of mess around with you psychologically for sure.
I definitely agree. Yeah, I definitely agree.
It's funny I say that as I'm wearing a Hellfire Club shirt with
Well, that's fun. That's Dungeons and Dragons stuff. That's good stuff.
Yeah, that's like heavy metal and imagery. Like I like all that.
That's very fun fantasy. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I like all that. Yeah, I like all that kind of like 80s heavy metal album covers with like demons and like zombie, like Iron Maiden, Dio, and all that shit.
Sure. I can feel that.
Yeah. Scariest part for you.
So this is a tough one. There's a lot of
Mhm.
scary moments
It's
in
the
this
hardest
movie.
one for me too.
Yeah, a lot of scary moments in this movie, but what I'm going to cite, because it's still, as many times as I've seen this film, and I have seen this film a
Mhm.
lot, but as many times as I've seen this film, it's still an image that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I have, watched this film enough that I am largely immune to being frightened by what it displays. But there is one shot, it's a very brief moment in the middle of this exorcism, that, like I said, still gives me the heebie-jeebies. And the shot is the Marin and Karis have been like thrown to the ground,
Mhm.
and Marin looks up and she's broken the restraints. And then as Marin looks up, the statue Pazuzu is there in the room with them, but the lights have gone down, and there's this almost like a hazy spotlight in front of her as Reagan is
Mhm.
clutching and clawing at the air, and as she is reaching up and clawing at the air, you can see the statue of Pazuzu again right there in the room with them. And that image, that it doesn't last for more than maybe 10 seconds, but that image still, 50 years on, and as many times as I've seen this film that I dearly love, that still gives me the chills. I'll still have a little bit of trouble shaking it off after I see that scene.
Yeah.
So that's why I voted it for scariest.
Yeah. I gotta say mine, and this was on the director's cut, I believe. It's Spider Crawl. Like
That
that.
is a very unnerving thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I gotta say another part that kind of made me jump a little bit because I forgot the exact moment where it was when she was flopping. It was at that shot when she's like flopping around, and then there was that one quick shot when she like lays back and her eyes are white, and she goes like,
Oh yeah. They roll up white.
"Yeah,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah." That was
The
pretty gnarly, but I also liked it on a technical sense. If like the makeup goes, I thought that was
Yeah. Oh
real,
yeah.
real interesting. That's what I look like when I discovered that we don't have any more milk. And I'm the weird person that actually drinks milk like just by itself.
Oh, plenty of people do that. Plenty of
Yeah.
people do that.
Well,
Yeah,
when
I
I
know
do
that.
that is like whenever I drink milk out of a glass, I just sit there, just staring to oblivion, and it's like a real artful shot, and I just monologue to myself
All
about
right.
violence
Hey. All
and
right.
like classical music. I'm obviously referencing a Clockwork Orange.
Yes. Listen, what oh God, I wish I could remember his bit of the old ultra violence. Bit of the old ultra
Yeah,
violence.
I've never seen the movie.
Have you never?
No,
Oh,
I need to.
well,
I'm
it's
a big
intense,
Cooper
man.
guy. Like I respect Cooper. I just he's not on my wavelength.
It's it's intense. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Like it's not a horror film per
Mm,
se, but certain scenes in it are more upsetting and disturbing than even in like The Shining. Like it's a very rough film. It's a very, very rough film. I
yeah.
can't emphasize it enough. Very difficult film.
So
Uh
let's
yeah.
do rating.
Okay.
How
I'm
would you
ready.
rate this movie? 5 out of 5.
Let's Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
easiest and most predictable. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. Well, like I cited, it's my favorite film. But even if I'm putting on my objective critics hat, we've referenced it a couple of times. I think the fact that the film still carries so much of its same power 50 years on. I mean, you kind of just have to respect the artistry at
Mm,
that point, even if it's not your thing,
mm,
even if it's not a film that you really connect with to the degree or love it the degree that I do or some other people do. You kind of just have to respect, like, yeah, it's
yeah.
still got the goods 50 years on, and that's saying something. Yeah.
Yeah. So real quick, um, do you personally believe in demon possession?
Um, that's a tricky question. I am going to say that I believe it is possible. That's where I'll just land it at that. I believe it is possible. I think to understand that, for listeners who might be like, "What? Who is this Looney Tune?" is I'm a very big believer in possibilities. So phenomenon that people engage with over time and discuss with over time, whether they talk about alien abduction or ghost sightings or various other preternatural or supernatural phenomenon, I subscribe to the belief that if even one of those instances that are reported about were true, then it is possible. So to that end, I accept that I believe it is possible. That having been said, my belief about the engagement that we have with evil and with the natural world has definitely evolved over time. And I would not be of the variety of people who would immediately look at something and be like, oh, they're possessed by something. I think it would require a tremendous convergence of specific things happening for something like that to even be a plausibility. But the short answer to the question, after the very long answer that I gave you a question, the short answer is I think it's possible.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a skeptic. I think if the devil
Sure.
is real, I think he would psychologically get to, and I feel like demon possession or insured possession would be just too obvious for him.
Yeah, and in these days, that's possibly very right. I would definitely be more inclined to, like Father Karras in this movie, to utterly exhaust the natural, what we've learned in psychology, what we've learned about mental illness. If somebody was exhibiting strange phenomenon, that would be, even myself, even after the answer I gave you, I would say exhaust those possibilities first, because it is so likely that those possibilities are actually what's happening. I think skepticism is the healthy attitude about that subject, sincerely.
Yeah, for this has been, that's some interesting stuff, man. And
Thank you for having me.
let me ponder on this. So before we go, do you want to plug your podcast real quick?
Oh, thank you for letting me. Yes, so I am one of the co-hosts of the Fear of God podcast every week. Myself and my good buddy of 20 plus years, Nathan Rouse. We dissect horror films and we talk about them through the lens of faith, sometimes just through the lens of life and living it. And sometimes we get real granular about what we believe, and sometimes it's more just asking good questions. We say that we explore, we don't explain, and we examine what scares us to find what saves us. And so, you can find that over at thefearofgodpodcast.com. And that's kind of ground zero for all the different things that we do. That website will take you wherever you want to go.
Yep. And before I get to my little wrap up thing, so we're in the month of October as you're watching this, and as I understand it, you got a little project you're doing over at the Fog.
Yes, indeed. So about this time, we are going to be making our way through the Scream franchise. We're going to be covering every single film. Going to be looking at, and some of the films we've covered before, but we'll be revisiting them in the spirit of, kind of just covering the entire franchise. Very similar to what we did last year with the Michael Myers Halloween franchise. So now we've made it a sort of a tradition that every Halloween we're going to walk our way through an iconic franchise, and this year's is Scream. So,
And
yep.
we can still be doing the Treehouse of Horrors for the Patreons.
That is the plan. That is the plan. Yes, we're recording it a little early, so I, as of right now, I'm going to say yes. We are still doing Treehouses of Horror for the patrons because we had so much fun doing that. So yes, that is still the plan.
Yeah, and like I said, we're filming this like a couple months in advance, but we're So as we're recording this, we're actually in talks of me being on the Scream series.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, as soon as you said you're in Scream this October, I'm like, I gotta be on there because I fucking love those. Those movies are amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I'll
Yeah, that is the plan.
Yeah. So real quick, I know we're a little bit over time here, so I'll do my plug in and then we'll end this episode. So on that note, if you like this episode and you want to see more spooky and weird content, make sure you slash that subscribe button, follow me on Facebook and Twitter X, because that's what I'm calling it. I refuse to call it
Twitter X. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. At Horror, Sci-Fi, and Beyond. And also, don't forget to leave this episode a killer comment and give this episode a King Kong thumbs up. This has been Drew from Horror, Sci-Fi, and Beyond. And before I go, I just want to say one thing to my audience. Everybody pay attention. Pay attention to Lackey.
Okay.
Whatever you do in life, do not fuck with Ouija boards.
Noted.
And this has been Drew from Horror Sci-Fi and Beyond. Over and out. Bye.